chapter 1, and it took us a couple of weeks to get through chapter 1. But in chapter 1, remember Habakkuk had lamented the wickedness of the people of Judah. He was concerned about how evil his own nation was, and God, what are you going to do about that, right? And so God answered him, and he didn't like the answer that God gave. The answer was, I'm going to bring another people in against them and bring destruction upon them. And that would be the Babylonians that he would rise up. They would be a vicious nation. They would bring all kinds of swift destruction and play by their own rules, and they exalt their false deities. And so the answer just didn't sit well with Habakkuk. And so in the latter part of chapter 1, verse 12, beginning, and on through until 2 and verse 1, he begins to question God. How could a good God use such a wicked people as Babylon? That seemed inconsistent to Habakkuk with God's character. And so he reminds God of his character. Not that God needed a reminder, but Habakkuk reminded him of the nature of his character. And so should he not judge Babylon instead of Judah? Was sort of the direction that Habakkuk was going. Maybe we can use our people to judge them. And what good would that do to make Judah any better, right? All that would do would be affirm them in their sin if God were to use them in that way. And so that certainly wasn't going to work. But the text closes out with Habakkuk conceding that he is likely wrong. He just doesn't know how he's wrong yet. But he is likely wrong. And so verse 1 of chapter 2, I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart and watch to see what he will say to me and what I will answer when I am corrected. I love that text. We need to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers, and that's okay as long as we have a willing heart to be corrected and then allow the Lord to correct us so that we actually understand his will. So now we're going to go into chapter 2 and beginning at verse 2, and this is God's response to Habakkuk's concern that God was using Babylon to punish his own people. And so chapter 2, and starting at verse 2, then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak, and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. Behold, the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. Indeed, because he transgresses by wine, he is a proud man, and he does not stay at home, because he enlarges his desire as hell, and he is like death and cannot be satisfied. He gathers to himself all nations and heaps up for himself all peoples. Will not all these take up a proverb against him and a taunting riddle against him and say, woe to him who increases what is not his? How long? And to him who loads himself with many pledges. Will not your creditors rise up suddenly? Will they not awaken who oppress you? And you will become like their booty. Because you have plundered many nations, all the remnant of the people shall plunder you, because of men's blood and the violence of the land and the city, and all who dwell in it. Woe to him who covets evil gain for his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of disaster. You give shameful counsel to your house, cutting off many peoples, and sin against your soul. For the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the timbers will answer it. Woe to him who builds a town with bloodshed, who establishes a city by iniquity. Behold, is it not the Lord of hosts, that the peoples labor to feed the fire, and nations weary themselves in vain? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to your bottle, even to make him drunk, that you may look on his nakedness. You are filled with shame instead of glory. You also drink and be exposed as uncircumcised. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you, and utter shame will be on your glory. For the violence done to Lebanon will cover you, and the plunder of beasts which made them afraid, because of men's blood and the violence of the land and the city and all who dwell in it. What profit is the image that its maker should carve it? The molded image, a teacher of lies, that the maker of its mold should trust in it to make mute idols. Woe to him who says to wood, awake, to silent stone, arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, yet in it there is no breath at all. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. All right, so Habakkuk chapter 2. He starts in the first few verses with a vision. And Habakkuk, again, he's waiting for God's answer, waiting for the correction. And so here we have it. And it's recorded for him and for others to be corrected as well as we may need. And so the vision that's referenced here in verse 2 and 3, I believe that is the interaction between Habakkuk and the Lord. That's what he's talking about here. Not that there's some vision to come for Habakkuk in the future. There's no reference to anything of that nature. But the vision is, here is God revealing beforehand. It's prophetic. Here's what's going to come to pass. And that's one of the things that God uses visions for. And so it might give us an idea of how it is that Habakkuk has received this. It's not just direct communication. Habakkuk speaks, God answers directly. That's not what's going on. He receives it in a vision.
One might think that what was stated here would be against the Gentiles rather than the Jewish people.
It is.
And yet, but it says, you also drink and be exposed as uncircumcised. And how would that affect, like, a uncircumcised person in the first place who wouldn't care?
Well, and he's using the word uncircumcised there, I think, in a figurative sense, that your shame is going to be shown. And the parallel to it is the idea of exposing one's nakedness. Yeah. And so the prophet's not going to end up saying, or God's not going to end up saying, from a Jewish perspective, that uncircumcision is not shameful. It is. From a Jewish perspective, it is. And whether the Gentile understands that or not, and this, I don't know that Nebuchadnezzar ever knows what's said here. It wasn't for his benefit. This was for Habakkuk and for anybody who's along with him wondering, why is God using these Gentiles against us? Right? That's for them to understand. And so the uncircumcision, the shame of the Gentiles will be revealed. Because it looks like for a little while that God's really blessing Babylon. Things start to look really, really good for Babylon. And which I can understand how some of God's people might look upon that and think, Lord, have you forgotten who we are? And he hasn't. That's why Babylon's doing what it's doing, because Judah is not what they should be. And if they had got their act together, then it would never have come to this. But because they did not, therefore this is what comes. So yeah, everything in there is dealing with the Gentiles, though the application is not just for the Gentiles. There's application for the Jews to take for themselves out of this as well. So
yeah, because when I read, woe to him who built a town with bloodshed, establishes a city by iniquity, and because you have plundered many nations, all the remnant of the people shall plunder you. When I read you've plundered many nations, I think of empire, right? I think of
Yeah,
Babylonians.
that's Babylon building themselves.
Yeah,
Yes.
but then there's a lot of stuff that's applicable to anybody.
Yes.
Because, woe to him who built a town with bloodshed, right? That's like universal in a
Yep.
way, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And then also, the only name that's mentioned is for the violence done to Lebanon, will cover you,
Yes.
right?
And don't take that literally, because it's not intended to be taken literally. We'll talk about what Lebanon is, but
Right.
it's not literal Lebanon. It's actually a reference to Jerusalem. So, yeah. All right. So, going to give you a vision. Write it down. Write down what I've revealed to you. Make it plain. Inscribe it clearly on tablets, as the New American Standard says. And so, the same thing was stated to Moses about recording the law. Make sure that you record it plainly. Deuteronomy 27, verse 8, you shall write very plainly on the stones all the words. God wants his word to be understood, right? God's intent is never that his word is a mystery to people so that they cannot understand. He wants it to be revealed and understood. People look at Revelation with confusion and they, and that's because of all kinds of theories. But what does the word revelation mean? Frame the word to reveal, right? That's what the book is about. The Greek word is apocalypto, but the meaning of it is to reveal, to unveil something, and that's the nature of all of God's word. And so, inscribe it clearly on tablets, make it revealed, and then he talks about that he may run who reads it. Now, at first glance, that sounds like a reaction of terror. That's not actually what it is. That he may run who reads it. It's actually about hope. The running here is about taking the message out to others. And so when a good message has come, in those days, you don't end up texting it to other people. You don't send out email to other people. You don't even write it down on a piece of paper and put it into Canada Post and send it that way, right? How do you spread news back in Habakkuk's day? You talk about it, and then you get messengers who run. You've got runners who go here and there and everywhere revealing messages. This past Tuesday was teaching in 1 Samuel. And last week we were in chapter 4 through 6. Chapter 4 through 6 is where the Ark of the Covenant has been stolen by the Philistines, and a runner comes from the field to report to Eli what has happened. And so, that's the duty. A runner goes and runs and gives messages. Later on, when you get to David's time, there's going to be runners that come and give messages. And there's one occasion where there's a first runner who gives a message, and then, I see another runner off in the distance. There's an update. That's how they got updates, was these people were, very adept at running and remembering what the message was. So that's what this is about, that he may run who reads it, that, they know what the message is, and they go and share that message, because it's actually a message of hope that is being revealed here. It's something that is good, because God, though he is using an evil nation, using Babylon to accomplish his will, he does not endorse their wickedness, nor is he going to allow them to continue indefinitely. He will bring judgment on them as well. And so, but there's a need for patience to see the fulfillment of the vision. And so that's what we see in in verse 3. The vision is yet for an appointed time. Wouldn't we love it if it just happened right now? But it's not happening right now. Right now, Judah is evil. Judah needs to be punished. But there is an appointed time to come when Babylon will fall. And so he says, at the end it will speak and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come and it will not tarry. And so the time is not yet, but the time is coming. And now Habakkuk doesn't know when that time is going to be. You and I have the benefit of hindsight. We know, hey, it's going to be when the Medo-Persian Empire comes in and defeats Babylon in a night, right? And so the time will come, God's word will come to pass. How often does God's word not come to pass? Yeah, it always does. And so when God says something, it will happen, right? You've likely heard me say this before. If I promise to do something and several weeks have passed and I haven't done it, I forgot. You need to remind me what I said I would do. If God promised to do something and a couple thousand years pass, that's okay, because he has an appointed time when it will happen. And so God will always keep his will.
I always remember the moments of, I think it's Hezekiah, where he's prophesied that calamity will come upon his house.
Yep.
And then he repents. And the prophet immediately comes back to him and says, okay, God has seen your repentance, basically. And now he's delaying what he said.
Yeah.
But the fact is, what he said is still going to happen, right? It's not going to happen in your time.
Right.
It's going to be after your time.
Yeah. Yeah, it was Isaiah who had come in. Basically, the message is, get your house in order, you're going to die. And then he turned around and walked out. And Hezekiah repented. He humbled himself and prayed to God. And so as Isaiah is walking back out, the Lord tells him to go back in. And the message when he goes back in is, you've got 15 more years. The judgment against your people is still going to happen, but you have 15 more years. And so he wasn't going to die imminently. Yeah, so God's will is always going to come to pass. Now, verse 4, behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by faith, by his faith. So there is a contrast here between two groups of people. There are the proud and the just, and they are opposites of one another. The proud, they are of a haughty spirit. They're self-righteous. They're boastful. They are overbearing and narcissistic. They're pompous and contemptible and scornful. And there's just a whole list of ways that we would describe them. They're corrupt people. They are dishonest people, immoral, vile. And so that is the one side of this equation. And then the other side, the just, these are fair-minded individuals. They're conscientious people. They're honest and trustworthy and upright and virtuous, and therefore they're described as those who are living by faith. Now, when Habakkuk looks out to the people, what's he seeing?
Well, you see a lot of proud people, but I don't know that he's seeing a lot of proud people.
Right, especially after God's answer. He's like, well, maybe we're not that bad, right?
I think he thinks that they're just, but they're actually saying otherwise.
Yeah. So the first group of proud people to consider are the unfaithful Jews. That's what caused Habakkuk to start asking God questions in the first place, right? Remember chapter 1, verse 1 through 4? And then I'm sure that after the answer that God gave in verse 5 through 11, Habakkuk was wishing he'd not asked the question. Lord, wickedness is rampant. Your law is not accomplishing anything. The righteousness is gone. Those who are to preserve judgment, they pervert it. Lord, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to bring Babylon in and destroy them. Oh, I wish I hadn't mentioned that, because we're really not that bad, are we? Right. It's a matter of denial. And again, he's comparing things. And we need to not do that, right? If we see wickedness out in the world and we comprehend what wickedness is in the world, and then we see the same thing inside the body of Christ, do not rename it righteousness because of who it is that's doing it. It doesn't matter where it's happening. It's wicked either way, right? And so the unfaithful Jews are part of the description that is here. And now it's not exclusive to the unfaithful Jews, but they certainly are the beginning point, at least in the book of Habakkuk. That's where Habakkuk started from. Now, Habakkuk's focused on the Babylonians. That's what the latter part of chapter 1 was all about. Lord, they are wicked people. Are you going to allow somebody to slay one who is more righteous than he? And we talked about it last week, whether or not the Jewish people at this point were more righteous than the Babylonians. And Ezekiel didn't seem to think so. Ezekiel was very blunt in saying that they are worse than, well, what did they say? Worse than Israel in the north. They're worse than Ethiopia. They're worse than, and he talked about going off to Chaldea. And so they're worse than the Chaldeans as well. And so there were a few other nations that were listed there, but Ezekiel made it very clear that no, Judah is not righteous. They are a wicked people. Now, Babylon is wicked as well. Habakkuk is right. The Chaldeans are an evil people, and so God's going to bring judgment upon them. But that doesn't exclude Judah from that number as well. Again, we can't have tinted glasses when it comes to looking at our own sin versus looking at sin elsewhere, right? If we have sin, it's still sin, and it still condemns. And so we need to be cautious that we don't fit into that circle of individuals. On the other side, those who are just, the faithful Jews. Now, in Habakkuk's day, there weren't a lot. No, the number was very, very small. There would be a remnant who continued to love the Lord and would seek his will. Habakkuk is among them, right? That's why he's troubled at what he sees and wants God to deal with this. In the same time frame, Nahum, Zephaniah, and Jeremiah. Those are three other individuals who are in that same general time frame who are also righteous individuals. When the judgment comes against Judah, Babylon comes in and takes them over. The proud are destroyed, but then remember, Jeremiah's been telling them, don't fight. You just go with the Babylonians and build houses and build families, and your descendants will come back later. But during that time, that's Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and no doubt there were some others as well who were carted off, who were faithful to God. But this statement here applies far beyond Habakkuk's day and time with the captivity. Behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. The application of it really is to anybody who trusts in God. Anybody, anywhere, who is willing to trust in God and walk by faith in him. In fact, this statement in the latter half of the verse is repeated in the New Testament. The just shall live by faith. And so we're going to see it over in Romans chapter 1 and at verse 17. This concept of the just living by faith, it would be it would culminate the gospel where Jew and Gentile come together into one body and are called to live righteously before God, to display faith and faithfulness in their lives. It's over in Galatians chapter 3, verse 11 is the specific text, but that's where Abraham is an example of the just living by faith. And then Paul makes the point that it can't be achieved by perfect law keeping. That's not how Abraham did it, because Abraham wasn't even under the law. But here's how you please God. The just shall live by faith. He intends double meaning, I think, in the text in Galatians chapter 3. Certainly the exercise of having faith in God, which Abraham did and David did and Daniel did and so many others that are recorded in the Old Testament did. But then he proceeds in the context of Galatians 3 to establish a contrast of the law versus faith. And it's not my personal faith, but the faith. He's talking about the gospel, the New Testament. But again, in Galatians 3, he's citing Habakkuk 2 and verse 4. And then Hebrews chapter 10, verse 38 is the third time. And in this context, the writer speaks about those who are suffering. They're suffering for their faith, and bad things are happening to them. They're being reproached. And even in the midst of those kinds of things, do not cast away your confidence. Continue to walk by faith. The promise that's spoken in Hebrews chapter 10 is the same promise that's made here. Live by faith, continue by faith. Don't draw back, don't turn away. God is going to see the faithful, and God is going to keep them and preserve them. All right, so that's verse 4. Now, beginning at verse 5, we now have this proverb against Babylon. And so Habakkuk's concern was, hey, the wicked Babylonians, God, what are you going to do with them? And God makes it clear, I'm going to judge them too, because they are wicked. And so verse 5, indeed, because he transgresses by wine, he is proud, a proud man, and does not stay at home. Because he enlarges his desire as hell, and he is like death and cannot be satisfied. He gathers to himself all nations and heaps up for himself all peoples. Now, there is a lot of information in verse 5. The he that is mentioned in the text, I suspect, is a reference to Nebuchadnezzar, at least primarily to Nebuchadnezzar. I think more generically, it is whoever's in power or whoever the ruler is of Babylon. But Nebuchadnezzar is the one who achieved most of the accolades of Babylon. And so I do think he is the central figure here. Well, so far as Nebuchadnezzar, he was a prominent man of war. It talks about how he does not stay at home, enlarges his desire, and gathers to himself nations and heaps for himself peoples and so forth. Nebuchadnezzar was very, very active as a man of war. And so he defeated Assyria and the Egyptian army at Carchemish and Hamath. That's around 605 BC. Subdued all of Syria and Palestine, the city of Ashkelon in 604. Suffered some heavy damages against Egypt a little bit after that, and so remained at home for a period to rebuild, but then goes out and subdues Arabia and then goes on to Judah, 597, 599, 598, and 597, that time frame. Turned his attention to the north again, Syria and Elam, 596 to 594. More conflicts with Jerusalem and Tyre, the siege of both cities between 587 and 582. He is a man of war, just active for a good stretch of his time as king.
You mentioned that he was beaten by Egypt for a time. And is that why Jerusalem put their trust in Egypt?
Yep.
Against Jeremiah's word?
Yeah, that's what Jeremiah was warning them against, because Egypt actually did have a good battle against Babylon, sent them with their tail between their legs back home. And so that made Judah think, oh, Egypt will save us. Like, don't turn to Egypt. Jeremiah was very adamant about don't turn to Egypt. And what do? They turned to Egypt. In fact, they carried Jeremiah off to Egypt as well. And so, yeah, that good understanding of the time frame and what's going on. Absolutely. All right, so he's in battles a lot. He is a man of ego. He is a proud man. He always acknowledged himself in the accomplishments of Babylon, right? Is this not great Babylon, which I have made? That's his statement over in Daniel chapter 4. He thinks that he is the one who has made all of this. He doesn't understand that God's the one who's exalted him.
Even in his dream that Daniel interprets, the statue, right? That statue is you.
Yeah, you, O king, are the head of gold.
Yeah.
Of course I am. Who else would be the head of gold, right? His dream exalted him. And gold as opposed to silver, bronze, et cetera, right? And so, there's plenty of pride and arrogance to go around with Nebuchadnezzar. His father showed up before him at the city of Babylon, and it was basically a wrecked city when his father showed up. And he used it as a base of operations for his military activities, but he didn't really improve the city a great deal. But when Nebuchadnezzar comes and he's now the one who is responsible for it, the city becomes just splendid. It's beautiful. He did all he could to make it a beautiful city, extended the walls and beautified the exterior portions of the walls. Who cares what the outside of your city looks like, right? But no, he wanted beautiful walls on the outside of Babylon. He paved the ceremonial procession way with limestone, rebuilt and embellished the principal temples, cut canals throughout the city, and did all of this to glorify himself and maybe his gods too a little bit, but very, very much about himself. What's Babylon famous for? There's one thing in particular people know about it. Well, they used to know about it. It's not there anymore.
I think of the Tower of Babel.
Okay, that's a little early. It's something that Nebuchadnezzar did. Have you heard of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon? He's the one who did all that. And in particular, it was for one of his wives. He married a Median princess, and she desired to go back home. And so he created these gardens to give her a feel like she was back at home. And they became basically world famous, these hanging gardens that he had made.
Yeah, it's one of the, it used to be one of the 7 wonders of the world.
Yes, yeah. So it's sort of a big deal. So, all right. So, check marks for both of those descriptions out of chapter or out of verse 5, right? He is this ongoing battle guy. He is this man of ego. He transgresses by wine. Now, was that Nebuchadnezzar? I'm not sure. Maybe he had an issue with wine. I suspect that this is more about the downfall of the nation than it is about Nebuchadnezzar and the nation in general. This is about the end of it, and that would be under the time of Belshazzar, who is Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. And Belshazzar, remember in Daniel 5, he hosted a drunken feast, had all of his soldiers and commanders and so forth inside the city and joining in this feast. And so who's on the wall watching to see if anybody might attack? Nobody. Everybody was in there getting drunk, right? And then to make matters worse, he decides, why don't we bring out of storage the gold and silver vessels which my grandfather had brought back from the temple in Jerusalem? And so Daniel 5, verse 3 and 4, they brought the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple of the house of God, which had been in Jerusalem. And the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood and stone. And anyone know what happens in verse 5, 6, and 7 now? There's a hand that shows up and starts writing on the wall, right? And the writing on the wall is not good for you. It is, your kingdom is done. You're through. And it happens that night, right? So, the same hour, the finger of a man's hand appeared and wrote on the wall in the king's palace, and it was about the downfall of the kingdom. And then the next morning, it's no longer Babylon. Well, it's still the city of Babylon, but it's not Babylon in control of it anymore.
The transgression by the wine, is that directly to that? Not in them in general, but because of the wine, they came up with this idea to go and violate God's law.
I think that it is. I think it is specifically about the fall that would happen. Babylon's fall happened entirely because of this drunken feast that Belshazzar decided to have. If he's not doing that, they may not have fallen at that point in that way. But to go and take the vessels of God and involve that in a drunken feast where he's going to praise the gods of gold, silver, bronze, and iron, and wood, and stone, and so forth. No, God's not going to allow that to happen. Now, did Nebuchadnezzar have a way with wine as well? He might have. It's not anything that we ever read about him. And so I'm not saying that it wouldn't apply to some degree to Nebuchadnezzar or to his father or who was the one between them? Between Belshazzar and Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. Was it Darius? Oh, no, Darius is the one who came in, the Mede who came in. Or the Babylonian king in there. Wasn't Nabopolassar, was it? No, that was his father. I can't remember the guy who's in the middle, but there may be an application in a generic sense, but I suspect that this is how you have caused your kingdom to fall. That's the major reason that they fell that night, was the stupidity of Belshazzar. So the drunken stupidity of Belshazzar. So, all right. So in verse 6, these things that have been revealed by God to Habakkuk, they will stand as a testimony against Babylon and their impending fall. And so, there's your answer, Habakkuk. Yes, they're evil. I'm going to cause them to fall too. And the remainder of the chapter, verse 6, there's this taunting riddle or song of woe. And the remainder of the chapter is presented as that taunting riddle against Nebuchadnezzar, against all of Babylon. And the way that he does that is in a series of woes. Here are 5 woes about Babylon that lead to its fall. You want to know why Babylon fell? Here it is right here in the latter part of our text with the woes that are pronounced against it. And so the first one starts in the middle part of verse 6. Woe to him who increases what is not his. How long? And to him who loads himself with many pledges. So God raises up Babylon to judge his own people. That was the purpose. That's why God wanted to use them. Babylon went further, much further. They did things that God had not commissioned them to do. And I sort of get it. They're a powerful nation that's getting more and more powerful. And so they want to spread their wings as wide as they can. But part of the problem is how they did that. And God did not agree with how they did that. And so their territory is increasing drastically, and peoples and nations are subject to them, and they're falling. They're either paying tribute or they've been destroyed. And they grow really, really mighty by this excessive violence and oppression that they bring upon people.
Yeah, it's common in the ancient world for warfare to involve plundering the nations that you speak through, right? That's kind of the way you pay your troops as well. They keep a portion of the plunder, right? So, and this tactic continues. I think even like today, if it weren't for media, right? That it was basically the introduction of mass media that prevented the plunder of nations, because that's seen as thievery. And here God is saying it is kind of thievery. Woe to him who increases what is not his, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's throughout the history of warfare. That's what you see is plunder.
Yeah, and they had a tendency to keep going back to the same people over and over again. And so they've already plundered these people, and so they're impoverished now. Well, let's go take what they have remaining, right? And so they go back and they plunder them again, and now they've got what's less than nothing, because that's sort of where they're at now. And then they work hard and they achieve a little bit, and what do you know? Here comes Babylon again to steal the rest of what they have. And they did that, of course, with Judah. They come in upon Jerusalem 3 times. Now, in what they're doing there, they are actually doing God's will, because Jerusalem needs to be destroyed. But if you look at what they do up in the north, up in Syria, they do the same thing. They go at Syria at least 3 times, and they just keep on, plundering more and more and more, and causing all kinds of hardship in the midst of that. And it's not beyond the Babylonians to go ahead and kill in order to get something. If somebody tries to defend themselves or keep what's theirs, chances are they're dead. And so they are just a wicked people in the way they deal with it. But God's going to bring a nation upon them who would overthrow them and plunder them. The Medo-Persian nation is what's going on, the Medes and the Persians. You will become their booty. Well, what was left of Babylon the next day after the drunken feast? The city's still there, but who's in charge of the city now? They installed Darius the Mede. It's no longer Babylon. I don't know what they did with Belshazzar. We're not told, I don't think, in the text in Daniel 5. But he is nothing now. And any Babylonian troops who were out and conquering in the name of Babylon, they just went out conquering in the name of a nation that no longer exists, really, because their capital city is now under Medo-Persian control. And so they would be very swiftly overthrown and subdued, and the plundering that they had done had come back upon themselves. Verse 9, woe to him who covets evil gain for his house. Covetousness will destroy a man, a household, a nation, insert whatever you want to, right? Covetousness is going to bring about destruction. Babylon was built on a whole bunch of covetous whims of her king. Every little thing that was done in Babylon, every improvement was all about the king wanting to be greater than others, wanting his city to look better than others. Again, who beautifies the outside of the city wall? but he did. Yeah, when people approach Babylon, they need to see this glistening city, right? Not really, but anyhow, everything that he did was about arrogance and covetous activities. And so, he glorified in bringing others to nothing, subduing them even to the point of destruction, but then he built up himself and his city. And so, woe to him who covets evil gain for his house, that he may see his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of disaster. That is what Babylon was doing. That's what Nebuchadnezzar was doing, was destroy everybody else, set himself above everybody else. Well, how's that work for saving one from disaster? Isn't that sort of what Edom thought they would do? Remember when we were studying Obadiah? They were glorying in the fact that they were up in this mountainous region, and who can ever defeat them up in this mountainous region? God. Yes, they forgot about God, right? And so God did. He brought destruction upon them. Same thing for Babylon. You can make yourself as great as you want to. When it's your time to go, it's your time to go.
Yeah. It's what you said, that God can stop. And that is why in Revelation we read Babylon falls, right, in a single day. It's the reminder that no matter how great an empire may seem, right, God can still bring it to his knees, because there's only one kingdom that's everlasting. That's the kingdom of God.
Yeah. And the imagery that's between what's there in Revelation, what's over in Daniel about Babylon, the writer's drawing from the true Babylon and what was going on there, right? Because everybody's in awe of Babylon, amazing Babylon, right? And then the next day, it's not Babylon anymore. Well, it's still the city of Babylon, but it's not Babylon. It's not the empire of Babylon. It's been destroyed. He acts based upon greed and wrongs his neighbors. And in wronging his neighbors, what God says is you end up wronging your own soul in the midst of all that. When you mistreat others for personal gain, that's an awful evil to commit. And, how many of Jesus' teachings addressed greed and the end result of greed? Remember in Luke chapter 12, the guy who, his crops went, very, very good harvest this year. In fact, I don't have enough room in my barns to put it. So what's he do with it? Well, I'll just tear down my barns and I'll build greater barns so that I can store all of my crops and my goods. And he had no focus for anybody else. It was all about him. He was greedy. And then the Lord said to him, tonight your soul is required of you. Then whose will these things be which you have provided? And so his goods did nothing for him. Luke 16, we've got that rich man. Lazarus is out at the rich man's gate. And Lazarus didn't want a steak dinner. All he wanted was crumbs. Did the rich man give Lazarus any crumbs? Not willing to do that, because everything was about him. And so they both die. And Luke 16 shows that he goes to torments and Lazarus is in paradise, Abraham's bosom. And so his greed did not help him out at all. His greed brought destruction upon him. The servant in Matthew chapter 18, remember, he's got a great debt and his master calls him in and he pleads with his master. His master's going to throw him in prison, but he pleads with his master, and so the master forgives him. What's that servant then go and do?
He goes ahead and shakes down everybody who owes him money.
Right. Find someone who owes him money. You owe me money. Give me my money. Right. And the guy is pleading with him for mercy, and he doesn't show any mercy. No, throw him in prison. Well, it was told to his master what he had done, and he himself is thrown into prison. And the problem for him is that the debt he owed was a debt he could never pay. And so he would never get out of prison. Matthew 16, verse 26. What profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? Greed will destroy somebody. That is the message of Scripture in the prophets, in the Proverbs, in Jesus' teaching, in Paul's writings. Go where you want to in Scripture. Greed always brings destruction.
The point of committing suicide is to
Yeah, absolutely. There's never a good thing that will come out of it. Unless one realizes it's wrong and repents of it. That'd be the only good thing that can come. And then that's because it's ceased. So greed will destroy. And he talks about the prophet hears from God about the stones of the walls and the timber beams crying out against him concerning his greed. Where'd he get the stone walls and the timber beams? He's plundering other places and bringing that home, and he's building up Babylon in the process of doing that. And so even they attest to his greed and his mistreatment of others. So then we get to verse 12. Here's the third woe. Woe to him who builds a town with bloodshed, who establishes a city by iniquity. So the town being built here is Babylon, and it was expanded and beautified and made wonderful through the destruction of other people. That's how they got great, is by destroying other people. They plundered, they tore apart, they destroyed city after city, nation after nation. The spoils of warfare served to build up the magnificence of Babylon. They built their city by bloodshed. So again, Daniel chapter 4, verse 30, the king spoke, saying, "Is this not great Babylon that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty?" Look how good I am, right? That's his statement. Verse 13 in Habakkuk 2, "Is it not of the Lord of hosts that the peoples labor to feed the fire, and the nations weary themselves in vain?" Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, they had worked a whole bunch in all their plundering and all their destroying and all their murder. And as much as it seemed that they had a lot for their labors, it would all come to nothing. It would crumble. The imagery here of the people's labor to feed the fire. What happens if you stop feeding the fire? Oh, okay. So you actually have to keep on laboring in order to accomplish anything. It will go out if you stop. And so you need to keep on feeding the fire, because if you don't, then everything you did before you stopped is now in vain because it's gone out.
That's like when you have a life that is built on conquest and violence like that. The analogy of fire is rather apt because it's something destructive.
Yeah.
You're not building anything really. You're stealing and plundering and destroying.
Yes.
So you have to keep doing that.
Yeah.
Unlike you build something up and it grows.
Yeah. And anything they built failed in comparison to all the destruction that they committed.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then with the Lord, all the effort that they put into feeding the fire, as it were, is useless because they feed the fire, and then God snuffs the fire out on them. You're done, right? And so after that arrogant statement by Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 4, that's when he went out into the field for a time as a beast so that he could learn humility. And so he spent some time out there. Here's what he learned. Daniel 4, verse 35, "All the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing." Is Nebuchadnezzar included in that number?
Well, this is after his revelation.
Yeah.
God is in control.
That's me too. All the inhabitants are reputed as nothing. He does according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. No one can restrain his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" Nebuchadnezzar got to realize, maybe I'm not so great, right? Because God is the great one. And all that Nebuchadnezzar did, and he was really arrogant about himself in the first 3.5 chapters of Daniel. And then what caused him to go be a beast? It was God, right? And what control did Nebuchadnezzar have to not have that happen to him? It just happened, right? There was just nothing he could do. And so he is subject to God. Everyone is in every way. And so all of the effort that he had put out and all the destruction that he had done in this violence to build his city was pointless, because none of it glorified God. He could have accomplished what God intended him to accomplish to God's glory. There was a way to do that, but it wasn't the way that Nebuchadnezzar chose. So Jeremiah also borrows from Habakkuk 2 in verse 13. So again, verse 13, behold, is it not of the Lord of hosts that the people labor to feed the fire, and nations weary themselves in vain? Jeremiah 51 and at verse 58, thus says the Lord of hosts, the broad walls of Babylon shall be utterly broken, and her high gates shall be burned with fire. The people will labor in vain, and the nations because of the fire, and they shall be weary. That's Jeremiah taking what Habakkuk had revealed to him, and he's now saying, here's the application of that. Babylon is going to fall. It's going to be destroyed. It will be brought to nothing. And so all the work of the Chaldeans was slated for ruin itself. Well, Habakkuk's getting his answer, right? They're evil, Lord. Shouldn't you judge them? Yeah, going to judge them in due time. Verse 14, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. All right, so if God's going to destroy the greatest nation on earth, well, what's he going to replace that with? The earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of God. God's going to reveal his greatness and his might. The might of the greatest world power is nothing compared to the might of God. And so they're going to fall, their glory and their power is going to be forgotten, but the earth is always going to end up being filled with the knowledge of God. Now, sometimes it doesn't look like it, right? In Habakkuk's day, it certainly didn't look like it. That's okay. People had forgotten. God was going to remind them. In our day, it might not look like it, right? There's so many people who know nothing about God and have no interest in the things of God, and yet God will find occasion to bring about reminders here and there. And so we need to do our part in that as being those who know the will of God. We need to share that with people. But the earth is going to be filled with the knowledge of his will. Habakkuk borrows here a phrase from Isaiah. So Isaiah was prophesying before Habakkuk, and then Jeremiah was after him. So he's between the two of them. Isaiah 11 and verse 9, which is about the Messianic kingdom. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. That's where that phrase comes from. Now, again, God's reusing what he used with Isaiah, right? But quite simply this. Now, Habakkuk's use is not messianic. Isaiah's use is messianic. It's in Isaiah chapter 11, which is a messianic text. Habakkuk's use is not messianic. It's about the restoration of Judah. Now, you need that in order to get the messianic kingdom. If Judah's not restored, there's no messianic kingdom to come. But that's the application here. And so after Babylon is destroyed, we've got Cyrus who becomes king. And Cyrus, his first decree is, all you who are the people of God, you Jewish individuals, go back to your homeland. Go back and rebuild your city. Go back and rebuild your temple. Why is he doing that? Well, because God told him to, right? And I don't know that Cyrus knew about it, but Isaiah, 200 years before the fellow was born, wrote, I believe it's Isaiah 43 or 45, wrote that there would be a king by the name of Cyrus who would send God's people home. Again, I don't know if Cyrus knew that Isaiah wrote about him, but he did exactly as God intended for him to do. All right. It's 8 o'clock. I think maybe we stop there because there's plenty more in the next couple of woes to carry on with, and then some application to do after that. So far as the application thus far in these things, don't be like Babylon. They thought they were great. They thought they were accomplishing lots of wonderful things and they were glorifying themselves, and they were. But that's the problem. They were glorifying themselves and not God. And so don't be so concerned about greed and about lifting ourselves up and exalting ourselves. Be concerned about serving one another and doing what is good for other people and building up the Lord, because the knowledge of the Lord is going to outlast anything that you and I do. And so if that's the case, maybe we commit ourselves to the knowledge of the Lord and sharing that, because that is the greatest thing we can do. Anything else is vain. It just has no point. When we look at the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter where all our name has been written, unless it's in the Lamb's Book of Life. That's the only place that really matters. And so let that be our focus. All right, next time we will pick up, Lord willing, at verse 15, and finish out chapter 2. I suspect we'll likely get into chapter 3 at that time as well.